Let's start. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us in the world. I am Flore-Anne. I'm the head of the Financial Consumer Insurance and Pension Division at the OECD, and also Executive Secretary of the OECD International Network for Financial Education. And I have the pleasure of welcoming you in this webinar to launch an important publication on the evaluation of national strategy for financial literacy. So just to say a few words in terms of welcoming remarks, we have the pleasure today in this webinar to have esteemed speakers from Canada, Peru, and the UK who would be actually sharing their experience with the evaluation of national strategy for financial literacy, and also a great number of international guests today. I have to say that we are very pleased to see that many of you have chosen to join really this webinar on this topic. As you will know, the OECD and its International Network for Financial Education has really focused on evaluation and monitoring of financial literacy from the beginning, and I would say more recently has also focused on the evaluation of national strategy. The global financial literacy community is certainly in agreement with the importance of evaluating those strategies, with a great number of registration and many of you attending the meeting today. Importantly, the OECD 2020 recommendation on financial literacy underlines the importance of evaluation and certainly recommends that monitoring and evaluation are incorporated to assess the progress of a national strategy, while also including monitoring and evaluation plans for individual financial literacy programs. This is because evaluation and monitoring are really essential elements of assessing the effectiveness of public policy, benchmarking against desired outcome, and supporting the development of evidence-based measures. Evaluating financial literacy strategy and financial literacy program are two different concepts and processes. The work on evaluating national strategy is actually fairly new, with the current report being published as one of the first outcome of the work of the OECD and its International Network of Financial Education on this important topic. The OECD has already produced a large body of work on evaluating programs and initiatives as such. The first of this work was the OECD INFE high-level principle on evaluating financial education program, which was published in 2011, so more than a decade ago, and it was published alongside two guides to evaluation that same year. The work also included some work on program evaluation under the Russia World Bank OECD Trust Fund for Financial Literacy and Education, which included a report on evaluating financial education program, survey, evidence, policy instruments, and guidance that was actually prepared for the 2013 G20 summit. The OECD has worked on the concept, good practices, and good principle of evaluation of national strategy for financial literacy for the last couple of years as part of the work to support and implement the recommendation that I just mentioned and that was approved by OECD government in 2021 and recognized by G20 financial ministers, central bank governors in 2021. So this work specifically focusing on evaluating national strategy for financial literacy actually began in 2019 within the OECD INFE working group on standards, implementation, and evaluation. And I'd like to thank very much Armenia, Australia, Hong Kong, China, who have been co-leading the work of this group and largely contributed specifically to the work on evaluating national strategy for financial literacy. We launched actually a survey among the INFE membership and conducted in-depth interviews over the course of 2019 and 2020. And again, special thanks to some of those who have accepted to be interviewed among Armenia, Hong Kong, China, Indonesia, Peru, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the United States. We drafted then a report based on this survey and this in-depth interview, gathering further information and country inputs, and this report was finalized in 2021. The final report was actually approved in the 15th meeting of the OECD INFE Technical Committee in May 2021. Evaluation of national strategy, I'd like to stress, is really important because first, it generates valuable evidence to steer the direction of the entire strategy. It provides measures of success or impact that may help to bring more resources and attract stronger leadership to support the national strategy. It also really helped to build the policy case for financial literacy ensuring that financial literacy intervention and strategy are accountable in terms of the resources that are spent on them, and also making sure that those strategies can be built over the long term. It can also encourage the use of data and evidence-based approaches throughout the financial literacy community by creating a culture of evaluation and monitoring. It may also elicit broader support and international partnerships through the sharing of evidence and knowledge. Evaluating national strategy is, however, complicated and certainly a long-term process. It must involve multiple sources of evidence of both quantitative and qualitative measures nature, and I really insist on the fact that we need evidence on both the qualitative side and the quantitative side. It involves multiple stakeholders and often the wider financial literacy community, nationally and sometimes internationally. It often involves professional external evaluators to ensure that evaluation is independent, and obviously it requires dedicated resources. The comprehensive report that will be launched today includes selected case study to illustrate lessons learned, distill specific KPI used by peer globally, and it also outlines a model template for structuring the process of designing and evaluation of a strategy. These elements are all aimed at providing guidance to policymakers interested in evaluating their national strategy for financial literacy. However, as with national strategy themselves, there is no one-size-fits-all model when it comes to evaluation framework, and adaptation, of course, are needed to take into account economic and policy circumstances, specific goals, and available resources within one country. Now, without any further ado, I would like to hear, of course, about the report itself, and I would like to thank very much my colleague Kiril Kossev for producing the work, and this will be followed by the panel discussion. I wish you all a very good discussion and a productive event, and I'd like to hand back the floor to Chiara Monticone. Chiara, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It's really a pleasure to see many of you connected with us today. So my name is Chiara Monticone. I'm a senior policy analyst in the financial education team at OECD, and I will moderate today's session. So first of all, I would give the floor to my colleague Kiril Kossev, who will give a presentation of the report, and then we will hear from our colleagues from Canada, Peru, and the UK about their national experiences. And I would like already to invite all the attendees to share their questions, both for the OECD and for the international speakers via the Q&A function or the chat. And I will take those questions at the end, so after the three presentations. So Kiril, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Thank you, Flore-Anne, for the introductions and the opening, and thank you everyone, of course, for joining, and especially our colleagues and experts who are going to provide further discussions and presentations. So without further introductions, let me share the slides and give you a bit of a taste of what the report is about. So my presentation will not be very long, and of course it will only provide a sort of surface overview of what this rich report is about. The report is full of country examples, of useful case studies, of synthesized policy lessons. So I strongly encourage you, of course, to have a read and hopefully to use it in your work. So as Flore-Anne kindly mentioned, evaluation has been a very important process for the OECD and its INFE, and it has been acknowledged in many policy documents, and preeminently in the 2020 OECD recommendation on financial literacy, which I would say is the key and the most important point of reference for policymakers globally on financial literacy. So these recommendations suggest that incorporating monitoring and evaluation to assess progress of a national strategy and proposing improvements is going to be crucial to a successful strategy. The recommendation also summarizes some earlier work of the OECD, which has been largely focused on evaluating and monitoring financial literacy programs. And of course, it outlines a certain number of the elements that this work was based upon, in terms of how effectiveness of public policies needs to be acknowledged and measured, in terms of also benchmarking towards certain desired outcomes, and in terms of encouraging evidence-based approaches across the entire stakeholder community. So you can see here a link to this important document, and you can see that where the basis for our work on evaluation started. So again, this has not been this has been indeed a work based on a couple of years of solid data gathering, evidence gathering, and information gathering. We are very grateful to the entire community of OECD INFE policymakers who have provided their expertise. And it's especially true for those who participated, who led and participated in the OECD INFE working group on standards implementation and evaluation. We have had multiple working discussions, and we have had a very structured stock-taking survey that collected quite a lot of insights across 29 countries and economies. Then we held a series of in-depth interviews, which were truly very, very helpful to understand exactly how this process of evaluation are planned, designed, and implemented. And importantly, this was a nice mix of approaches to collect a little bit of quantitative data and also a little bit of insight through the interviews, which has resulted in a very, I think, rich report. It provides, as I said, summaries of various country experiences, but as well as in-depth case studies. I think it will be particularly useful for countries that are curious to understand how their peers are conducting such processes. As Flore-Anne already mentioned, the report was finally approved, cross-checked, discussed, and approved by the OECD INFE Technical Committee. And I think as of today is now available online. It's an important piece of work, as you can see below on the slide, because it really summarizes in one place and provides a bit of new guidance in one place of what's essentially an internationally vetted policy advice on evaluating national strategies. And we believe it should be an essential part of financial literacy policymakers' toolkit. So I will have really three broad messages to pass on today related to the evaluation experiences of OECD members, also lessons and good practices across the global financial literacy community, and then a statement about sort of blueprint or a template about an evaluation of national strategy that can help those of you who may wish to start, who may think of embarking on such a process. And this broadly follows also the contents of the report. So what's really important is the message that policymakers conducting this longer-term comprehensive evaluation campaigns and processes, they employ a mix of methodologies. They do not rely only on one or another type, they rely on both quantitative and qualitative methods. So most often, national strategies have overall goals or mission statements that are then translated through a variety of other policy documents, for example, like action plans that translate into a broad set of quantitative or measurable indicators. It appears that it's useful to have these more precise, measurable and quantitative indicators because they provide key bits of evidence later on for reporting purposes or transparency or communication purposes. Often these indicators are measured, or rather most often these indicators are measured via ways of regular financial literacy surveys. And there are also, of course, trackers, more regular monitoring devices. The report has a few very useful case studies describing particularly innovative trackers that look at financial behavior, for example. Some national strategies, and this is just to provide a bit of perspective, some national strategies have really only aspirational goals that, for example, look towards supporting citizens in making better decisions for their financial future, and also to understand financial systems. And that is left a little bit as an aspiration, while evaluation is based on a different set of objectives, And that's sometimes done for a deliberate reason. It is, of course, we operate in an uncertain economic environment, so sometimes having objectives directly linked to a longer term goal may not be politically the most astute move, because it is be hard to aim to claim that all the achievements or all the final indicators are the result of policymakers' work. So there's also this element to consider. It's interesting to point to a few of the quantitative objectives. Of course, all national strategies have financial literacy objectives that are most often separated into the elements that financial literacy is made up, like knowledge, behaviors, and attitudes. Well-being is a very, very popular, also financial inclusion is a very popular objective that is as well measurable. Quite interestingly, at least about a third of or a quarter of the respondents suggested financial stability and economic growth objectives, which are of course a bit broader than financial literacy and may involve more complex, if you like, evaluation techniques. What's a real challenge, and I think that has emerged throughout our work on this report, is to translate a longer term national strategy goal over many years, over multiple programs being run, is to translate this into directly measurable outcomes. And one way to overcome this challenge is to develop appropriate key performance indicators. We have acknowledged that this is quite an interesting area for majority of the policymakers we discussed this product with. And we decided that it would be nice to outline not only about case studies of how to design KPIs, but also a set of widely used KPIs. So the report you will find provided here in illustration, you will find a nice long table of types of objectives, how these have been translated into KPIs, and then how are these KPIs used. So it should be quite a useful tool for those policymakers who are interested now in thinking about measurable objectives. It's been quite useful to also gather a little bit of information about how evaluation campaigns are funded, how are they resourced, and then how are they used for further reporting communication purposes. So it's emerging that the majority of evaluations of strategies do not have dedicated funding specifically earmarked for such activities. They tend to be part of institutional resources or institutional budgets, which may mean that often they compete with other competing processes and programs. You will find that one of the recommendations of this report specifically is that evaluation being a process that should be started early on, and it would be a fairly long-term process over the lifetime of national strategy. It deserves its own dedicated resource base, otherwise it would be very difficult to do in the comprehensive manner, in a systematic manner that we recommend. It's of course reporting of evaluation activities is ubiquitous. Most of those policymakers who engage in evaluation, they report on it. But the more astute, more strategic approaches tend to have a communication campaign that is built around some of the evidence emerging from evaluation. So in fact, that's quite a useful positive externality from the evaluation process that provides hard facts or good arguments that can be used in broader communication and transparency campaigns. So that's also one of the key recommendations to utilize evidence emerging from the evaluation process. Moving on to lessons and good practices. So there are three key groups of lessons that I will go through. Of course, many lessons in the report. Yet again, I would encourage you to have a read of the full text. Here, I would quickly discuss about starting and planning the process, then designing an appropriate plan, and implementing the evaluation. So designing an evaluation process should start truly early on. It should start as early as designing the actual national strategy, in designing a set of action plans. This is where it will be appropriate to already start thinking about and penciling down evaluation objectives that would be directly linked to the action plans. This is where one would start thinking about conducting, creating a theory of change, a sort of expected outcomes of the evaluation process. And this theory can be very strongly linked to the expected outcomes, of course, of the entire strategy, but it will also provide a first opportunity to start involving key stakeholders into the discussions of these outcomes and getting them involved in the evaluation process itself. It would create positive feedbacks, not only in terms of discussing the strategy itself, but also into discussing how evidence will be built and how stakeholders will take part in the evaluation process. Here would be appropriate to start considering what sort of resources one would like to earmark specifically for evaluation. And also a key lesson has been bringing in external professional evaluators. We have received very good and strong messages from policymakers that did conduct evaluation, that involving professional evaluators brings external expertise and skills that may well not be available in-house. Also, it brings a sort of an external view on a process and an opportunity for a fresh perspective. So this is something to think about when embarking on the evaluation process. And then various approaches have been applied, but of course the most useful approach is an approach that is systematic and comprehensive. It tends to run through the entire lifetime of the national strategy, but builds as well some flexibility. So planning should be there, but some flexibility ought to be built in. And this flexibility can be built on a set of assumptions about at what stage of the national strategy various evaluation objectives should be produced and achieved. This is where the various approaches and evidence basis can be built, both quantitative, a set of data that can emerge from trackers, from financial literacy surveys, as well as more qualitative base where discussions and broader understanding of the process can be developed. And finally, all these elements can be brought together into a comprehensive theory of change, which allows also the entire evaluation process to be tracked. The final element is, of course, the implementation itself. So there's only really one key message on the implementation. It needs to be thought of as an inclusive process, one which engages not only, if you like, the coordinator or the key people and institutions that are involved in coordinating and implementing the national strategy for financial literacy, but also the immediate layer of stakeholders that are working and implementing on financial literacy, and then other broader actors in the community. Why is it useful to have this inclusive process? Because it will create not only this culture of evidence-based processes, of evidence and goal-oriented delivery of national strategies for financial literacy itself, but also to create a discussion process of evaluation rather than an evaluation process linked to solely objective and finger-pointing discussions. So bringing closely stakeholders would have its own policy externalities into sharing knowledge, into generating knowledge, and into working towards a common goal. And finally, I wouldn't really want to share too much on this because there's a nice comprehensive chapter in the report that deals with providing a template, if you like, a blueprint for evaluation. It is set around the key elements of designing a theory of change. There's a suggested frame about the steps and the elements that need to go into such a theory. And then mapping the entire plan. There's a fairly complex chart which again has a message about how to make sure that this entire process is inclusive and how not to leave certain stakeholders or certain elements in the financial literacy environment behind. And finally, it's useful to think about conducting what I call here reality check, but it's effectively a process where there are stages of evaluation as well as implementation of the national strategy. There is sort of rethinking of assumptions. Have they been borne out? Is the implementation going exactly as planned earlier, or is the evaluation itself going as planned earlier? So there should be a set of reality checks along the way, and the report suggests certain elements to structure these reality checks. So on this note, I wanted to thank again everyone for their attention, to encourage you to have a look at the report, which has already been uploaded, and to leave a bit of time, of course, for questions now or as the other speakers follow on. Thank you again, and let me hand back to Chiara.
Thank you very much, Kiril, for this comprehensive presentation. I'm sure many of our attendees today are already clicking on the link to see what's exactly in the report. So I see that a few questions are coming in through the Q&A, but before that, I would like to really give an opportunity to our three great speakers today to share their experience. So we will start with David Hayes, who is Senior Research and Policy Officer at the National Consumer Agency of Canada. And I will shortly invite him to share the experience of Canada. We know that Canada has just launched a new iteration of the national strategy in 2021 for the next 5 years. So this is a really great point in time to hear about your experience in revising and evaluation your previous strategies. Dave, the floor is yours, please.
Thanks, Chiara. I'm just going to share my screen here. Perfect. I assume you can see that and you can hear me. So I'll say hello, and thanks for inviting me here today on behalf of the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. First off, most importantly, I'd like to congratulate you on the launch of the report. It's an amazing report. Actually, I was the person on our side for the standard implementation evaluation working group, and so I'm really familiar with a lot of that work as well, and so I've seen it unfold, and it's been incredibly useful to us as we've developed our own strategy. So it's great to see so many countries contribute to a document that identifies so many best practices, and tackles so many of the challenges of creating a national strategy, not just highlighting the great things about it, but it also highlights the need to evaluate progress and really celebrates, evidence-based thinking. As a researcher, that's so wonderful for me. So today I'd like to talk to you about, as Chiara said, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Canada's renewed financial literacy strategy, which I think connects well to many of the areas in this report. So in July of 2021, we launched our renewed financial literacy strategy called Make Change That Counts. And you can see the overall organization of it here in this figure. So the strategy is a departure from how we've previously approached financial literacy in two ways. The first is that instead of placing the onus on consumers, this national strategy calls on all stakeholders to work together to build a more inclusive, accessible, and effective financial ecosystem for all Canadians. So it's an ecosystem that will help rather than hinder people. This is the idea. And it's a system that will enable rather than encumber Canadians' ability to make good financial decisions and build financial resilience. So in our prior strategy, Count Me In Canada, that's what we called it. It was launched in 2015. And we also took a different approach to evaluation, which relied sort of heavily on stakeholder feedback about their initiatives and consumer participation by tracking website use and overall reach, for instance, and by fielding national surveys. We're going to continue to do that, but we're sort of expanding that approach now. So our renewed strategy will really continue to use these tools, but it also takes a new approach, which I'll sort of talk a little bit about in the coming slides. So in the consultations that we conducted on the renewal of the financial literacy strategy, stakeholders were clear that a national financial literacy strategy should remain a priority, but that literacy alone would not lead to better financial outcomes. So they emphasize that to keep moving the needle, the financial ecosystem needs to evolve so that it can be used effectively by everyone, and so that it can reach more Canadians, and in particular people facing the most challenges due to barriers or other circumstances. So specifically, stakeholders propose that the strategy focus our efforts on reducing barriers and catalyzing actions in the ecosystem. You can see those sort of highlighted here. So if I go to the next slide, you can see that we sort of unpack this here. It's a change figure. It's essentially the same content, but we're looking at more of the logic. And so you can see that the strategy has 6 ecosystem priorities. It focuses on 3 that are aimed at reducing barriers and 3 that are aimed at catalyzing actions. So the priorities are for everyone in the financial ecosystem. So governments, regulators, such as us at the Financial Consumer Agency, financial literacy community groups, academics and researchers, as well as financial institutions. FCAC recognizes that all the stakeholders need to work individually and collectively to achieve these goals. And you can see that achieving these priorities will help the ecosystem evolve and help consumers to better navigate the financial marketplace, to improve their knowledge and confidence, and to make financial decisions that better suit their personal needs and goals. So ultimately, the goal is to help build financial resilience. You can see that on the right side. So at the outset, I said the strategy is a departure from traditional conceptualizations of financial literacy in 2 ways. So the first was the ecosystem approach, but the second is an outcomes-driven approach. So the outcomes-driven approach is one that tracks and evaluates progress towards achieving the priorities. So we can try to figure out what actually works, stop doing what doesn't work. It's key. So, you know, looking for those failures, which really are just lessons, right? And sort of collectively scale, you know, what does work. And so these ideas are reflected in the 2 boxes at the bottom of the slide there. So we can do this basically by following 3 steps. 1, we have to define the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. 2, we need to figure out how we're going to measure progress toward those outcomes and agree on the measures that we will all use, everyone in the ecosystem. And 3, we measure. Sounds so simple. And yet it's not simple. And I know this audience knows that. So the first of these is done for us. So we define the outcomes. For each of the 6 ecosystem priorities, the strategy provides 3 target outcomes. So each of those priorities has 3 target outcomes, and they're needed for the priority to be achieved. So we're in the process of working through step 2, which is to figure out and agree on measures. So to this end, we recently held stakeholder roundtables where we discussed some of our early ideas on measurement and asked stakeholders to share precisely what they're measuring. So the ultimate goal is to start measuring and using those measures to help track progress toward the outcomes to help, you know, evaluate the strategy overall. And so we all know here today, I don't have to tell you, measurement is really key to understanding success. So as highlighted nicely in the OECD evaluation report section on key performance indicators, right? Measurement, of course, helps us to define the landscape and track progress and changes over time. It helps us evaluate our overall impact, and also helps identify and demonstrate what works and what doesn't. So at FCAC, we're highlighting the importance of measurement by creating a measurement plan, which we intend to publish this summer, and which is really a continuation and elaboration of the national strategy. So the measurement plan is going to help us do 3 things, essentially. So to help gain collective agreements on how to evaluate, to identify and track indicators to achieving financial resilience, and to enable the financial ecosystem to identify initiatives that are really helping Canadians and build that financial resilience and help to scale them up. I'm not going to walk through this slide, but I just wanted to put it up there as an example of some of those target outcomes. So They were created with evaluation and measurement in mind. So these are measurable, but again, it's that idea that they are also outcomes based. So so their goal is really to nudge stakeholders toward the kind of measurements that will tell us if Canadian consumers are truly better off and more financially resilient, and hopefully away from, or at least de-emphasizing, the kinds of measurements that simply ask consumers, how they like or how they feel about using different products and services, for instance. Not that those are bad things, of course, but those are perhaps the more common questions that are asked. And so here you can see that, target outcome 1, more Canadians understand key facts about financial products and services that are available to them. It really digs in a little bit to, it's not about whether you've seen that people go to the website to look at the material necessarily. It's about whether actually once they walk away, you identify that they actually understand, they can identify that key fact. So the measurement plan really highlights the use of 2 kinds of measurements that all ecosystem stakeholders that I mentioned before, and they're sort of thrown up here in pictorial form on the left. They'll be encouraged to use and think about when designing their own initiatives or products or services. So the more concrete strategy aligned measures will typically be measured by individual stakeholders, and those will feed into high-level indicators, and which are going to be aggregate measures that provide an overall picture of whether the target outcomes of the strategy are being met. So FCAC will be a key player in aggregating and reporting on the high-level indicators based on the strategy aligned measures received from stakeholders. Disaggregated data that's broken down by age, gender, income level, and other demographic information is preferred to aggregated data. And of course, this enables us to determine whether we're moving forward in an inclusive manner. So we can determine if different kinds of Canadians, particularly those who might have vulnerabilities, are experiencing positive outcomes equally. It's also worth noting some of the key challenges that we know we face, and that I know that this audience is well aware about. And so, for instance, in order to get stakeholders to undertake and help further develop appropriate measures, we need to listen really carefully, as was said by Kiril before, to the challenges and barriers that they face, right? So these folks are all in the conversation and have been along the way. So we need to know that our suggested measures and approaches really resonate with the end users, with Canadians, and we're really trying to co-create this measurement plan using a human-centered lens. We also know that a plan like this requires flexibility. So to this end, we're building flexibility into the evaluation approach as we anticipate, ecosystem and agency needs will change over time. So an example of this is that we're currently building an R&D platform at the agency that will allow stakeholders to propose new strategy aligned measures that they're using to share results from their initiatives, to be able to so increase visibility for others to see what's happening and track overall progress on the strategy's priorities via a dashboard. So our next steps involve continuing our discussion with those ecosystem stakeholders, so across all the sectors. We've been, again, doing that sort of throughout, and we're going to continue to do that. We're continuing to look for what we call early adopters of the strategy and the measurement plan. So these are folks who have been collecting, great measurements, for instance, but also want to continue that conversation about what is a better or a best strategy aligned measure. And they're also willing to pilot measurements, for instance, and share their results in support of the strategy. And finally, as I said earlier, we plan to publish the measurement plan in the summer. So we're looking to do another consultation with stakeholders on a draft of the plan in the spring. So I'm looking forward to the discussion for the questions. Thanks again for letting me speak today and for providing an ongoing forum for, a very important topic. And again, congratulations on the publication. It's I know the work that goes into it. So it's incredible, and it's undoubtedly going to be used by a lot of countries, a lot of folks, ourselves included, to improve on our own strategies. And for the folks here today, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any ideas or if you have any ideas to share or you have any questions to ask. So you can see that it's a busy slide, but at the end of the day, right at the bottom of the slide, there's our email, and you're welcome. That's the email for the research team. You're welcome to reach out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dave. That was a very interesting presentation, and thank you for highlighting a very important point, that is that evaluation needs to be embedded and thought about since the beginning of a strategy as an integral part of the strategy itself, and not something that can just come at the end. So thank you so much for this. I will now turn to our second speaker, who is Juan Carlos Chong, who is the head of the Financial Education Inclusion Department at the Superintendency for Banks, Insurance and Private Pensions in Peru. So the SBS in Peru, they've been long-standing member of the INFE, contributing very actively. So we're really grateful for Juan Carlos' presence today. So Juan Carlos, the floor is yours, please. You're muted. I cannot hear you. Your slides are fine.
Now ready.
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chiara and Kiril. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I thank you for the invitation to share the experience of Peru. We are currently on the process of the second national strategy. We will try to talk about how we do all this process and what is the step that we have now. We have our first strategy that was launched in 2015, the National Strategy for Financial Inclusion. The period of the strategy was from 2015 to 2019. And then we replaced that with the second National Strategy for Financial Inclusion that runs from 2019 to 2030. In our case, the National Financial Education Strategy is embedded into the National Strategy for Financial Inclusion. So for financial education, the financial education approach on the first strategy was based to try to improve the financial capability of all populations. On the second, in the second strategy, our priority objective was to improve the trust on the financial system. So through financial education, we want people to increase trust in the financial system and then start working and be financially included. The assumption behind the first strategy was better financial education may improve improve decision process. On the national policy, the idea is to understand how to work with the financial system, will help to build trust and ultimately increase financial inclusion. How we do that? On the first strategy, we have 8 actions to do that. And on the financial inclusion, the national policy, we have 9 policy measures related to financial education and 24 indicators. So in the previous one, we have actions that we have to follow in order to increase financial education. On the second, on the national plan, we have policy measures and are linked with some indicators. That's the way that we will target the progress on the actions that we are making or we are doing. Some changing from the 2 strategies. We have the theory change. Actually, we have problem 3, the withdraw from the lessons learned on the previous strategy. So with this theory change, we learn how to monitor the progress and evaluate the strategy. So the leadership also was important. The commitment of the institution, the SBS was appointed technical secretariat of the Multisectoral Commission for Financial Inclusion. And the accountability, we have a new regulation that regulate all the national policies, and we report periodically to the National Center for Strategic Planning. So all the institutions that are in the National Plan for Financial Inclusion have to report to the National Center for Strategic Planning The information is collected through the technical secretariat and through the presidency of the commission. We report our progress. And some on the left side, we see what is the process of development, the plan. So what the problem 3, and we identify from that problem 3 5 priority objectives. The first one, the OP1, is generate greater confidence of all sectors of the population in the financial system. That is mostly related for financial education. The second one was have to sufficient and suitable financial service according to the needs of the population. We identify 2 barriers for financial inclusion. One is related to trust, financial education, and the other is that there are not suitable offer of financial product for the need of the population. So that is the OP2. The OP3 is to mitigate the frictions in the market, that is consumer protection. OP4, develop telecommunications infrastructure and digital platform. We relied financial inclusion and financial education on digitalization, and that's why it's important to have the Ministry of Communications and into the commission. And that's the last one, is to strengthen institutional articulation mechanisms. Something that we know that we need political will, we need to coordinate on governance side and also with private sector. And with this OP5, we want to create some working groups to strengthen these mechanisms and try to work with the policy without any interference from political changes that we have from the government. The PNIF has 5 priority objectives, 16 guidelines, and we have a multi-sectoral plan, the PEN, that is part of the PNIF. We have 30 policy measures, 107 milestones, and 69 indicators. To give you an example, what we see on OP1, that is the OP related to financial education. We will have an accreditation system for financial education initiative that is basically to have the principles on how we run the financial education program, and also to create a system to mapping all the financial education initiatives in the country. We will try to do yearly. The second one is to develop a financial education plan to Banco de la Nación, that is a state government bank. And one of the main efforts on this bank is to generate awareness about how to use the account that is called Cuenta DNI, that is the account linked to the national identity card, and it's a basic account. So we expected to have all the population with this kind of account that they can use for making transactions with the government and eventually with other institutions. So we will need a very strong financial education plan to disseminate how to use that. Strengthen education, basic education that is in schools, strengthen financial education or financial inclusion with digital approach on all the transfer program that is for vulnerable groups and beneficiary from social programs, financial education for adults and household members that is related with some actions that SBS is responsible. One is the Global Money Week that in this measure. The other is our workplace training program that is embedded on that action. And also we will have a comprehensive communication plan for financial education as part of the SBS commitment. The 1.6 is education regarding financing and investment mechanisms. That is investments. 1.7 is just the digital tool for entrepreneurs. 1.8 disseminating financial mechanism and guarantees for agricultural sector. And the idea is financial education and also strengthen the use of digitalization that prevent fraud. Some element that we have in our plan, we will have an evaluation, a midterm evaluation in 2026, and also a final evaluation on 2030. And they will be performed by independent auditors. So now we are trying to drafting how we will plan ahead those evaluations. Even though we are in 2022, we are trying to plan ahead how we work. some of the milestones that we have. So the milestones, we are trying to having the milestone related to some indicators. The Global Money Week from 2023 to 2030, we have an action plan that is one commitment of the state to work on the Global Money Week on these years. One is the milestones. The other is financial education for youth, elder people, workplace workers, and MSMEs. Financial education week for investors. The same with Global Money Week. We have the financial education week for investors also into the strategy. To develop digital tools for financial education, communication strategy for financial education of vulnerable groups, and women. Something important for women. We also have a law that was enacted by the Congress that said that the SBS and other institutions have to do financial education for women, for vulnerable women. So it's kind of a mandate that we have, and also we incorporate into the strategy, and teacher training program for financial education. And the indicators that are related, some of them, some examples of indicators, most of them are related to output and outcome indicators. Percentage of teachers from primary schools, social science, education for work, regular basic education, training of financial education, that is primary and secondary schools, teachers. Percentage of students that are both the level 1 of the PISA financial literacy assessment. So we also try to link with some international measurements, and that way that we will measure how we our training program with teachers and working with the Ministry of Education. Percentage of users of the program Juntos, that is a social program, sensitized regarding the financial education topics. Percentage of working young people, all those trained by financial education with adequate knowledge. We will try to measure some of the results of the people trained on these programs. And percentage of adults who recognize the importance of financial education. We will perform every year a survey to try to measure this variable. So we planning to do one this year, and then every year how to measure how we progress with all the action for financial education. This a kind of example that where now we develop a system on Excel spreadsheets, and we are trying then to work in the system more systematically. So we will have these tables for the public to bring some transparency on how we are working, and also we will have an internet system for all the members of the commission. Actually, we have 10 members of the commission that they can see and also insert the progress of the reactions. On the left side, we have the monitoring on the milestone of all the activities. We will track the progress. On the right side, we have also the responsibles, the officials that are responsible for the action and contact information, and also for all institutions that are collaborating. So we can keep track record of to who asked about the progress of the action, and also try to update it periodically due to changes that can occur. And finally, some of the lessons learned that we have. The formulation of financial strategy is a complete and demanding task involving several actors. So it requires very close coordination during the design and implementation process. Some of the challenges that we have when we work on the multi-sectoral plan, we did that during the pandemic. So we have to do all virtually. So all meetings were virtually, and we have to also make those round tables with many people on the virtual side. Sometimes it's a challenge topic, but we managed to do that and approve the plan last year, May 2021. And a monitoring evaluation system is very important to analyze and to follow the performance of how do we achieve the goals. That's why we require a robust evaluation system to facilitate all the policy making and all the proposals that we're making based on evidence. And that is important to have the political will and the support for the institutions to go forward on the national strategy. It's a process. Countries are improving the quality of evaluation system, even ourselves. We learn from the past, from the previous strategy, And then we try to link all the policy measures with some indicators to try to see that makes sense in order to have the impact that we pretend on our mission on the strategy. The international experience and good practice also help us to improve continuously our strategy. And so we will see how we work in this part. And thank you for listening to us. And well, later we can answer some questions. Thank you, Chiara. Thank you, Kiril, all for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Juan Carlos, for sharing the details indeed about how does it work in practice to set objectives and then to measure them. So let's now hear from our last but not least speaker of today, who is Peter Bailey, who is Senior Evaluation Manager at the Money and Pension Service in the United Kingdom. Again, a great expert in evaluating national strategies for financial literacy. So Peter, please, floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Chiara. Can you hear me okay? And can you see the slides okay?
Yes, both
Great.
sound and video.
Great. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My name is Peter Bailey. I'm Senior Evaluation Manager at the Money and Pensions Service. Thank you so much for inviting me here to speak today. So I'm going to go quite quickly through a few things in my presentation. I just want to reflect quickly on this great new report from the OECD. Then I'm going to talk very quickly about the purposes of evaluating national strategies, about what we're doing here in the UK, and then perhaps a quick word on the value of international learning. So the new report I also think is great. There's loads of useful practical ideas in there. It's going to be so helpful to help people design evaluations. I've just picked out 4 things which I'll run through here that just particularly resonated with me. Taking a systemic approach. These are all in the conclusions of the OECD report. Taking a systemic approach, really important to understand what system your strategy is working within. And we try to, in the UK, think about this through taking a theory-based mixed method evaluation design that we think can help us try to make some causal links between our strategy and what's happening in that complex system. Fostering a culture of evaluation, we think is really important because that in turn, we hope helps to foster a culture of learning and improvement. And in the UK, we try to support this through our evaluation toolkit that encourages a kind of consistent approach to measuring outcomes and doing evaluation. And an evidence hub that brings together insight and evidence that others can use. Flexibility is also there in the conclusions of this new report, and that is really important. Our strategy in the UK is a 10-year strategy, and I think if we all think back to 10 years ago, quite a lot of things have happened that we didn't expect to happen in that time. So we try to design an agile evaluation in the UK, delivered in phases so that we can adjust and change as we go. And the final thing I wanted to just reflect on from the new report is about communication. Who needs to know? Why, when, how do they need to know it? Really important so that your evaluation hits the mark. And in the UK, we, at the very start, develop something that we call a learning and sharing plan that thinks about each audience, what they need to know and when they need to know it, so that we can design our evaluation to produce evidence and insight for those people at the right time. This slide here, I was going to talk about the purposes of evaluating national strategies, and I'll come back to this in a sec. I think for now, I'd just like to say these purposes can change over time, right? Especially when you've got long 10-year strategies. So you may have a different purpose for evaluation at the start than you might do at the end. I'll come back to some of this in a sec. Again, here, I won't talk about this so much, but just to say that this is our 3rd national strategy in the UK in 15 years. And I think the point here is that financial well-being or financial literacy, they're not done after one strategy, right? Each strategy needs to build on the last, adapt to a new context, scale up what works. And in fact, Juan Carlos's presentation just now, I thought was quite good, really nicely showed how the two strategies in Peru have moved from one to the next context. So in the next couple of slides, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the UK strategy, looking at it in a system level and then just coming down to outcomes and evaluation questions. So looking at our strategy at a system level, that's the picture on the left here. We recognize that our strategy operates within this complex system, right? Complex system of regulations and products and services and culture. And it needs to influence this system in order to achieve its goals. And I thought that linked quite well with the OECD model and these nice different spheres of control, influence, and interest. Now that OECD model goes on to describe goals and objectives. So let's just take a look at them for the UK. We've focused our new strategy for financial well-being around 5 national goals or agendas for change that are looking at financial education for children and young people, savings and credit behaviour for adults, access to quality debt advice, and planning for and in retirement. Each of those are underpinned by delivery plans with sets of activities that we think will help to achieve those goals. And all of that provides a somewhat useful framework for our evaluation. So in designing our evaluation, we looked first at a high-level approach across the whole 10 years. We identified these 4 evaluation questions that we wanted to answer in those 10 years. However, we want to also carry out our evaluation in phases. So in our first phase, which is running from now until 2024, we're just going to focus on these 2 evaluation questions. What difference is the strategy making to our stakeholders and the way that they operate? And how is it helping to build what we call a financial well-being movement, where, you know, this is something that an idea, a concept that is taken up by all our stakeholders. And secondly, is it making sufficient progress? Now, what is sufficient is a matter of much debate, but are we on track to achieve the goals that we want to achieve in 10 years? Now, the other thing that our current evaluation will also focus on, and thinking about this conclusion in the OECD report, is about engaging with other evaluators who are evaluating individual programs and helping to support consistent, robust evaluation across all of that. So very finally, I just wanted to reflect on using insight from international work here, and just to think about 3 areas where we've done this in the UK. Different nations have different contexts, right? We'll have different cultures, different regulatory frameworks, different histories, but learning from international comparisons, it's not only possible, it's crucial. So much is transferable. We can be informed and inspired by what others have done, especially as sometimes those different contexts means that solutions come up that we would never have thought of. So it's why the work of our colleagues at the OECD INFE team is so important in bringing us together here. Very quickly, 3 things in the UK that we've done with the help of international comparison is our overall strategy design, really making use of so much of the OECD INFE reports, and of course many of you who have contributed to those reports have helped us to develop our strategy and to design our evaluation. Secondly, replicating or adapting interventions, helping us to understand people's behaviour, how to engage people and improve outcomes. We have learned from what others have done around the world in helping us to think about interventions to improve people's financial well-being. And thirdly, evaluation practice. There is a lot that we have borrowed from international development evaluation practice that is just a slightly different flavour to what you might have seen mostly in UK evaluation practice, and we've used that to help us understand how we can evaluate complexity. So that's everything for me. thank you very much. There's some links on my slide, but the OECD team, you're very welcome to share these with everyone, and I look forward to some questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was extremely insightful and enriching, and I'm sure it will prompt many new questions in the chat. So considering the questions that we have received so far, I would like to structure the various questions around the objectives of the strategy and of the evaluation. Then there are a few questions about the methodology, how to go about and do the evaluation and using different methods. And finally, there are some questions around the results of the evaluation itself and how to use them for future strategies. So starting from objectives, we have a question from Ilka, who is mentioning that both the Canadian and the Peruvian strategies were somehow linked to broader market reforms, and I would say also the one from the UK is linked to financial well-being, which is, I would say, very broad objective. So the question is, I was wondering if there are any further thoughts on standalone financial education strategies, considering these broader agendas. So what are your considerations? How does financial education fit into these broader objectives, and would you recommend to use such objectives or to focus on financial education and literacy more narrowly? So if any of you would like to take the floor and address this question, please just wave your hand. David, please.
I could say a few words. So Canada is unique, I guess, in many ways, in that the provinces really have the jurisdiction of education. So the Financial Consumer Agency doesn't. We don't develop the educational from a school perspective, right? However, we do a lot of work with the provinces, and we have a lot of educational materials, on our website, and we also produce a lot of educational materials. So I think all that is to say, for us, it's a bit parsed across government, but there's certainly a role for financial education, and we're always thinking about when we're considering those priorities and those outcomes, we're also looking at what educational materials are available or what educational initiatives are available. And again, it being outcomes based, the question is looping back to did they have the intended impact, in that did people actually do they actually have the information, and can they actually use it? And then one step further is the ideal, did it result in better outcomes, right? And greater financial resilience. So I'll stop there.
Indeed. These are complex things. Please, Juan Carlos.
Yes, in the case of Peru, we have the financial education strategy embedded into the financial inclusion strategy. And we do for many reasons. I think the most important reason is that most of the actors that are related on the financial inclusion agenda in Peru are also working on financial education. There are specific actors like the Ministry of Education that is basically for financial education, but most of the actors actually work on the financial inclusion agenda as well. And also we see financial education as one of the main components, or probably one of the most important components for financial inclusion in the country. That's why when we create a commission, we try to have one only institution, because the coordination between the government institutions is really complex, and having two different commissions dealing with financial education, financial inclusion, and probably have in some of the cases the same officials, so that can be more complexity, and for that reason. And the other one is, besides the coordination, as I mentioned, financial education is one of the components. So it's very close to consumer protection, so also with digitalization and financial inclusion itself. So that's why we think, in the case of Peru, after having the first strategy, that we think that probably it's very hard to work separately on financial education without looking at the other aspect of financial inclusion.
Thank you very much. Peter, would you also like to add something?
Yes, I suppose I'll just say that for us, we recognise that all of these things are interwoven. So we tried to make our very broad overall strategy to improve financial well-being a bit more specific by having our 5 national goals. And for each of those, we've got a list of activities that we think we want to do that could be anything from working with our government and with our financial regulator to think about products and services, all the way through to specific financial education interventions and trying to evaluate them, understand what works and scale up. So yes, soon, tomorrow, actually, we are publishing our delivery plans and you'll be able to see them and get a sense of what that looks like.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, I can add that also from an international perspective, we do see a growing tendency to look at those issues in interconnected ways, because this is what they are really. So I also wanted to pull a few questions from the audience related to the practicalities of doing evaluation, of using different quantitative and qualitative methods, and also about the costs. So I'm pulling questions from Alessia, from GFLEG, from Vera, from Brazil, and from Ana Maria Rosardi. So basically they're asking, how are you doing qualitative evaluations and in-depth interviews? They're asking, how are you using quantitative evidence for the long term? Like, are you using, like are you following people or outcomes over time? Are you using large databases? And on this, I think perhaps also Kiril may want to add something about other countries that are covered in the report, like New Zealand or Armenia, that are doing this kind of regular measurements over time. And finally, there is also the important question from Ana Maria, which is that doing evaluations, especially rigorous evaluations, is complex and costly. So how do you do it in practice? Do you hire external people, academics? And she's also asking if you can give an overall monetary sense, overall monetary cost of doing this kind of evaluations. Thanks. And again, the first of you who is ready to answer, please wave your hands. These are difficult questions. Please, Peter.
Hi, yes, quite difficult questions. I suppose, first of all, I'll just make clear then our evaluation here of the national strategy, this is an evaluation of the strategy. We are also running evaluations of lots of interventions, lots of different programs and services. But for our evaluation of the strategy, qualitative, we're using that to really understand how the strategy is affecting our stakeholders. So we will be doing a lot of qualitative work with a lot of our stakeholders, plus a stakeholder survey as well, to really understand how is this strategy working for you, how are you using it, how is it changing what you do. Quantitative, we would love to do longitudinal quantitative work. We've just never been able to make it happen just because of reasons, but what we are doing is we run every 2 years a survey of the UK population to understand changes in their financial well-being. So that will help us to understand how the population is changing. It won't tell us whether those changes are the result of our strategy, and that is where our qualitative work comes in to try to make some connections there. Evaluation, how are we doing it? We are commissioning evaluators. So my team, we manage and commission that evaluation. We've got some external evaluators coming in who are a big team who can be flexible and change and be agile, with academics involved as well to help us think about how best to do our evaluation. The cost, we are spending about £100,000 a year on the new case, on the strategy evaluation, right? We're spending more money on individual service evaluations.
Thank you very much for taking all the various different points of the question. Let me check. Juan Carlos, please.
Something that is important also to mention, to add, is that we have two things that we have to take into account on the strategies. One is the monitoring system and then the evaluation system. So we have to differentiate both of them. And on the monitoring system also, it's demanding on financial resources because we have to develop all the data and also the system to monitor the progress of the strategy yearly, and also human resources to all the coordinations, the people that will fill the data, and with public institutions, sometimes it's harder to keep track on the progress of that. And that's why we have the combination on qualitative and quantitative indicators. And most of the indicators are provided by institutions, but the time is a very time-consuming process for the monitoring. For the evaluation side, we put on the strategy to have the external evaluation, because the people that are performing the evaluation shouldn't be the people that will perform the evaluation on that. And the idea is to hire external consultant. We haven't do the process because we are planning to do on 2026. And in the case of Peru, also we are trying to see how will be the best way to put funding for the evaluation. Even though the SBS is the technical secretariat, we're evaluating something that is broader than the institution. So sometimes there are some things that we have to do for the procurement system, and probably rely on donors or institutions that can help us to do or perform that. No? But even though the evaluation is expected to do 2026, we have to start by now. We're planning ahead the evaluation with external consultants.
Thank you so much, Dave.
I can say a few words. Yeah, big topics, complex topics, right? And so I'll try to say a few things that are hopefully useful. So one, from the qualitative, quantitative perspective, of course, both are valued. From the qualitative perspective, it ranges from, we're continuing to do roundtables, consultations with stakeholders. We've done, focus groups, and very much like, Peter, it ranges from a focus on the strategy, also to right down to specific tools that we have, trying to help stakeholders determine, how effective maybe some of their tools are. And so it really there's a lot of variability there. From the quantitative side, throughout the pandemic, we've run monthly surveys on financial well-being, as well as bank products and services from the consumer perspective. We also do a Canadian financial capability survey, which is a national survey, which in the past has been 5 years, but will be changed to every year. And we have a lot of, there's a lot of quantitative questions. There's a lot of, there's subjective questions that are really important to be asking too, right? But again, as it wraps into going back to the strategy for us, it's outcomes based. So often with these, when and if you read the strategy, you'll see, from the priorities, when you dig into the outcomes, some of them we have a lot of information for, and some of them, which are equally important for consumers, we really don't have much information for across all the, across the entire ecosystem. And so some of those we're going to start at a different level, right? And that's where the qualitative becomes even more important, right out of the gate, to get a sense of where we should go. From a long-term perspective, from a sort of longitudinal data perspective, yeah, we would love to do that. We're a team of researchers. It's hard. It's also a challenge from a government perspective, because we work so hard to get the good data, but also to stay away from anything that, it's necessary data. We don't collect more than we want to. We don't, we respect privacy, all those challenges that comes with, collecting longitudinal data, but it is in our mind for the longer term. And so one step in that direction, again, is the R&D platform that we're building. So it's this idea that we'll have this integration of a place where stakeholders can come, share results, be able to then connect with other stakeholders right there on the platform, be able to see those results as we sort of put them together and aggregate them. And so that's sort of a step in that direction. In terms of costs, yes, we're definitely aware of the issue. And we know it's on the minds of all OECD members, and it's been discussed quite a bit. I don't have a good answer for you because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can tell you again, it's one of these multi-pronged strategies where, we have our own resources where, for instance, I put in the chat our last summative evaluation, which was an external assessment from a consultant of the strategy and some other financial literacy programs that the agency does. So we're able to do things like that, but we also work extensively with academics. We have a research committee and a broader network of folks. So we do quite a bit of that. Yeah, but it has challenges as well, right? As everyone knows. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. No, of course, this was extremely useful to better understand how complex it is to do evaluation in practice. So I would like to take another question from the chat, and which is possibly the question when talking about evaluation of national strategies and policies in general, which is how can actually attribute change to your strategy. So we all know that the objectives of a financial literacy strategy are broadly related to improving safe behavior or related to increasing financial inclusion and this kind of very high level and broad objectives. But we also know that in the time span of a strategy, 5-10 years, many things happen. There are many other policies at the same time, and there are lots of external factors, which can be COVID crisis or anything. So this is perhaps the most difficult part. How can you know that your strategy made a difference, taking into account all the rest that has been happening? So I know this is extremely difficult, and you may not have a definite answer, but if you have any thoughts that you would like to share in this respect, I think it would be extremely helpful for the audience. Please, Dave.
I'll be brief, but I'll just say that yeah, it's complicated, right? And that came from where the agency's on its second strategy, and that's one of the big lessons from the first one. And it's not to say that the first one somehow didn't do it right. I think, it did an incredible job in a different time, and now we're seeing, okay, how can we sort of learn from that and adjust? And so, we had the benefit of having that external consultation at the end, that summative evaluation, which is very helpful because they were able to go out and ask folks, what did you do? So we do have a sense of impact. It's a bit amorphous, right? It's not one-to-one, but there's a real clear sense that the messaging was really clear. It had an impact on stakeholders across the board. So that's great. Going forward, yes, we can still do that, but we also want to, again, this outcomes-based approach is a good way to try to link the two and getting what we call early adopters on board right now, where we have folks who are saying, yes, we want to be on the same page. We want to be asking the right questions in the right way. We want to be, we're getting folks when they're, when they're developing their initiatives now and saying, okay, what's the right way to sort of tweak this, or let's keep that conversation going. And so I think there's a closer link there. Again, it's not going to be one-to-one, but we're just trying to find a way to make sure that we're closing that gap.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Peter, please.
Yeah, absolutely what David just said. I suppose I would say, we can never know 100% that the changes that we measure were due to our strategy. And all we can do is give ourselves some confidence that the changes that we see might have been due to our strategy. And now we might measure over the next 10 years that financial well-being in the UK has gone up, or stayed the same, or even gone down, thinking about those external factors. But we think that through using some methods like maybe qualitative comparative analysis, other qualitative evaluation approaches that can help to understand what changes has the strategy led to that we can demonstrate, and how can that make us reasonably confident enough that those changes have led to changes in people's financial well-being. So we think we can do it. It's never a case of knowing. Unfortunately, I can't have a control group of the UK, however much I'd like one.
Indeed. No counterfactual. Juan Carlos.
Yes, it's very complex to measure that. The way that we are trying to measure is like all the milestones are related with indicators, and the idea is to, at the end of the day, to also have to measure the impact on the policy objective, the 5 policy objective, and then try to measure on the broader side of financial inclusion itself. So we spend hours trying to figure out how to do all that, how to measure that, and is very complex. There are some specific actions that also you can see, or you are doing, and you can measure how to increase financial inclusion, like the account that are linked to the national identity card, that we see substantial change on people with account in the financial system, and probably we will have on the years to come that one. And some indicators that we are also trying to track on financial education in specific areas, like try to measure specific programs, even though you cannot extrapolate the impact of a specific program evaluation to the whole strategy. So can give you some indicators, as the other speaker said, that you are going on the right track. So, having the external evaluation can help you also to track all the small evaluations of the program probably, and try to make a history of the impact of the strategy itself.
Thank you very much for being brave and answering this question. So there are a few more questions in the Q&A which are related to some specific aspects of your evaluations, or to some broader topics like financial education in schools. So we are at the end of our time, so I will not take them publicly, but I would invite our speakers, if they have the time, to have a look in the Q&A, and they may perhaps try and reply in writing directly to the participants. And with this, let me thank very warmly Peter, David, and Juan Carlos, and Kiril, of course, and also Jenna in the background for making this webinar possible. And I will hand back the floor to Flore-Anne for the closing remarks. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chiara, and my turn to thank you as moderator of this session, and warm thanks to David, Juan Carlos, and Peter. It was extremely informative. Thanks to Kiril for all the work on the evaluation of national strategy, which I think is really instrumental to all of us. I have been taking notes. Yeah, you can applaud, David. It's been a massive work by the OECD team, and they've done really the heavy lifting. I just was trying to take a few notes, because I think there were really a few highlights of this very rich discussion. So I just give you a flavor of what I wrote down, and perhaps a flavor of what's next also for the work of the OECD and of the INFE on this. So I think basically what we can gather from this discussion is that we are doing evaluation because we are in the business of financial literacy, because it's only a means to an end. And what we want to make sure is that we are reaching this end, which may be financial well-being, and that the UK is now naming its strategy financial well-being. So to make it clear that this is the end goal of the strategy, it can be financial resilience, it can even be financial stability in some cases, but clearly we are there to develop program and initiative and a strategy that is making a difference for people. And I think this is why we're so interested in evaluated, along with obviously there is accountability and tracking progress, but I think it is really this that is very important. All of you have also recognized that while financial literacy policies are extremely important, they are integrated into wider policy agenda around consumer finance. So financial consumer protection was mentioned, financial inclusion was mentioned by Juan Carlos, and I would say perhaps, you know, financial regulation at large should be mentioned. So I think that's also important to remain, you know, modest in our approach. Financial literacy policy are not necessarily the silver bullet, but we want to make sure that while we are developing a strategy around those ideas, they are indeed making a difference for people. And I think there is some good news that we are making progress along the way in terms of evaluating and implementing strategy. I was looking at your 3 strategy, which are actually second or third national strategy for financial literacy or financial well-being. And I was looking at the time scale, and most of the strategy are really looking at the long term, the longer term in a sense, and we see strategy that are from 5 to 10 years. So clearly we know that we want this change, but we are also all admitting as policymakers that it's going to take time. And I really like the combination of the macro perspective, the long-term perspective, and all of you also have kind of micro target and goals. So trying to combine these 2 dimensions, the long term, the shorter term, and the macro perspective, as well as the micro goals, initiatives, and measures as well, in order to make sure that, as Peter was saying, we are comfortable that we are making a difference. We cannot say for sure, but we are comfortable enough with the variety of data that we have. And again, I would like to re-emphasize the importance of quantitative data. At the OECD, we really like evidence and quantitative evidence. But as all of you put it, without the qualitative information, we don't know what has worked for who, what has failed and why. So we don't have the answer to why it's actually working or not working, and why it's working or not working for particular target audience. So very important to do that. And well, all of you have admitted that you need resources to do evaluation, and Peter was kind enough to offer a figure, which is very brave. So thank you for that. I know it's actually difficult because in most cases, the resource is coming from various stakeholders, and quite often it's not quite clear, you know, what is the actual number. What is certain is that we need to do evaluation, and we need to set aside enough resources to do that in a way that is credible and that is really allowing us to have this certainty that we are making an impact. Now, I just like to say that obviously you've all recognized the importance of international comparison, and I think this is what we are trying to do at the OECD and with the INFE, is not to say that there is an ideal, but that by comparing different practices, we can help you finding your own good practice in your country. And we will be continuing to do that. Financing was just mentioned. We are now working on how national strategy for financial literacy are actually financed. And we know they are financed through different channels in different countries. So we are working on that. And all of this work on financing strategy, on evaluating strategy, will feed into a new policy handbook on financial education. Peter, you were nice to mention that. This is a very good resource, and we worked on this with Andrea, who is also here, but it's a kind of, it was in the past, and now we want to develop a new policy handbook, because we know that your strategies around the world have changed, and we want to make sure that we are gathering the best good practices in order to continue supporting you. We will also, and I mentioned quantitative evidence, and you all mentioned that you were running survey on the level of financial literacy and financial well-being of the population. So we'll also be aiming at doing that across countries in 2022, 2023. And we are hoping that this data will be particularly important with respect to the impact of the pandemic, because again, we're interested at seeing progress, but sometimes we also want to make sure that we can also assess potential setbacks. So in a nutshell, this is where we want to go in the coming years. I remind all of you that the resource is really available now publicly, so I encourage you to have a look at this report. And I wish all of you a good day. You've seen an evaluation poll that was just up, so please fill that in. It's also important for us to evaluate this kind of webinar to make sure that they are still relevant and that we are responding in a sense to your demand. Well, thank you very much, all of you. See you hopefully soon, hopefully in person at some point, hopefully in Paris. Bye-bye. Have a very good day. Thank you very much.